The recovered footage opens on the forest, a still, overexposed shot through the windshield. For nearly 30 seconds, nothing moves. Then, just beyond the tree line, a figure shifts, tall and broad-shouldered. Just who or what was Jessica Marcial really filming in those final hours before she vanished? At 29, Jessica had built a reputation as one of Seattle's experienced wildlife photographers, someone who could track a mountain lion through old-growth forest or wait motionless for hours to capture the perfect shot of a nesting eagle. She was methodical, cautious, and grounded, in fact, the kind of person who double-checked weather patterns before ever stepping off a road, which made what happened next all the more impossible to explain. On October 15, 2023, Jessica was driving alone toward the Mount Baker area, roughly 90 miles northeast of Seattle. Her destination was a remote section of the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest, where she had been commissioned to investigate what her editor diplomatically called unusual wildlife reports. The dashcam footage begins with Jessica adjusting her rearview mirror and checking her equipment one final time before departing. Her voice, clear and professional, addresses the camera she's mounted on her dashboard, a habit she'd developed for documenting her fieldwork. Jessica recorded a brief field log before setting out toward the Baker area. She noted that the weather was clear and visibility would likely remain good for several hours. Her gear list included a telephoto lens, trail cameras, and enough provisions to stay out for up to 3 days if necessary. Before starting the drive, she paused, looking over a folder of ranger reports on the passenger seat. The documents described a series of unexplained incidents in the region: damaged equipment at research camps and large footprints discovered near survey sites that matched no known species native to the North Cascades. Jessica had never been drawn to cryptozoology. Her training made her skeptical of anything lacking empirical support. Yet these reports were hard to dismiss. They came not from fringe enthusiasts, but from people she respected: career rangers, wildlife biologists, and locals who had spent their entire lives in these mountains. She framed her investigation carefully in her notes, approaching the claims without bias and aiming to document an environmental cause or behavioral misidentification behind the sightings, never realizing that her search for reason would lead her straight into the inexplicable. She couldn't have known that by entering the Mount Baker wilderness, she would become part of the very mystery she'd set out to explain, or that the real question waiting in those woods wasn't what she'd find, but whether she'd return to tell it. The timestamp on Jessica's dashcam reads 2:31 p.m. as she merges onto State Route 20, the North Cascades Highway. The October afternoon light filters through the canopy above, creating shifting patterns of shadow and brightness across her windshield. The road winds steadily upward, following the natural contours of the mountainside. Jessica's commentary provides a steady narration as she drives, her voice relaxed and conversational. She notes the elevation, around 1,500 feet, and remarks that the area offers ideal habitat for black bears, cougars, and possibly even wolves migrating south from Canada. Halfway through the sentence, she pauses, glancing toward the tree line as though something had caught her eye. Then she resumes as if nothing happened. Her phone rings through the car's Bluetooth system. The caller ID shows her editor, Marcus. He's checking in before she heads too far into the backcountry, reminding her that she could bring assistance if she wanted. Jessica assures him she's fine, confident in her decade of experience handling difficult chutes and unpredictable terrain. Marcus doesn't sound reassured. He explains that local rangers have been filing unusual reports for months: equipment destroyed, campsites torn apart, and several hikers describing confrontations with something they couldn't identify. As he lists the incidents, Jessica's expression hardens, her attention shifting fully from the road to the implications of what he's saying. He describes witness accounts of a large, upright figure estimated at 7 to 8 feet tall, displaying aggressive, territorial behavior. One hiker claimed it hurled rocks from a distance. Another said it followed her through the forest for miles. There's a long silence between Marcus's words and Jessica's reply. She suggests that some of the reports might be attributed to misidentified primates, or maybe black bears, noting how they sometimes stand upright to survey their surroundings. Marcus concedes the point, but reminds her that the patterns don't align. Bears don't stalk people, and they certainly don't throw rocks with deliberate aim. Their conversation continues for several minutes as Marcus outlines more details from ranger logs. Outside the windshield, the dashcam records the deepening wilderness, the trees growing thicker and older, the road narrowing, and the distant peaks appearing through breaks in the forest, already powdered with early snow. At 2:47 p.m., Jessica notices the first anomaly. The radio begins to hiss with interference as she drives, filling the cabin with bursts of static broken by faint, low-frequency sounds that almost seem biological, like distant breathing or slow, rhythmic movement filtered through static. Marcus remains on the line, suggesting it's probably atmospheric interference caused by her elevation and distance from major transmitters, though there's an audible hesitation in his tone. Jessica continues adjusting the dial, scanning through frequencies. Most yield only static, but every so often she catches flickers of distant signals. Country music out of Spokane, a Vancouver news broadcast, fragments of Seattle talk radio. Later, aerial search records revealed that pilots who joined the search a week after her disappearance reported hearing that same radio static. She tells Marcus she'll check in again once she reaches the base camp area, estimating about an hour's drive remaining. He advises her to stay alert and to rely on instinct if anything feels wrong. When the call ends, Jessica is left with only the engine's hum and the intermittent crackle of the radio. The interference grows sharper, then fades entirely. She switches off the stereo, preferring the ambient rhythm of the forest, the whine of wind between trees, the muted percussion of gravel beneath her tires. Mile marker 47 sits at a sharp bend in the road where the highway curves around a massive granite outcropping. The dashcam timestamp shows 3:02 p.m. when Jessica first notices something unusual in the tree line to her right. She slows the vehicle, pulling onto a narrow shoulder barely wide enough for her SUV. The dashcam continues recording as she shifts into park, leaving the engine running. Through the windshield, the forest appears normal. Towering Douglas firs, thick undergrowth, the dappled light of late afternoon filtering through the canopy. But something catches Jessica's trained eye. A subtle movement, something darker than shadow, flickers between the trees about 30 yards from the road near a fallen log. She reaches for her binoculars, raising them slowly as the dashcam records her measured, deliberate motions. For nearly 2 minutes, she studies the spot in silence, adjusting focus, scanning for definition or movement. Then, just for a second, her hand trembles. Whatever she sees is enough to change her plan. After a moment's hesitation, she opens her door and steps out, intent on getting a closer look. Jessica exits the vehicle, leaving the driver's door open and the engine running. The dashcam now shows an empty driver's seat, the forest visible through the open door. Her footsteps can be heard moving away from the vehicle, accompanied by the sound of breaking twigs and rustling undergrowth. For 3 minutes and 17 seconds, the dashcam records only the empty interior of her SUV and the ambient sounds of the forest. Occasionally, Jessica's voice can be heard in the distance, though her words are indistinct. Then she returns, moving quickly, but not quite running. Jessica slides back into the driver's seat, slightly out of breath, her face lit by a mix of exhilaration and disbelief. She fumbles for her handheld camera, a professional-grade device she keeps for close documentation, and begins reviewing the images she's just taken. The dashcam records her reaction as she scrolls through the shots, pausing on one in particular, a massive footprint pressed deep into the soft earth beside a creek bed. Her notes, spoken aloud for the recording, are calm but precise. The print measures roughly 18 inches in length and 7 inches across at the ball of the foot, with 5 clear toe impressions. The depth indicates an extraordinary weight, possibly 400 pounds or more. The stride length between prints, about 4.5 feet, suggests a bipedal creature standing 7 to 8 feet tall. Jessica studies the image again, her analytical instincts competing with a growing sense of awe. In the reflection of the window beside her, the forest seems to shift, branches moving where no wind should be. This is exactly the type of evidence she came for: quantifiable, photographic, and verifiable. Yet as she steadies her breathing, it's clear she's also likely realizing the weight of what such evidence might mean. Whatever left those prints wasn't human, and it wasn't far ahead. She makes a decision that, in hindsight, might have saved her life, at least temporarily. The Dashcam records her calmly stating her plan. She will return to town, find a motel for the night, and come back in the morning better equipped and rested. Her tone is steady but edged with fatigue, the kind of practical resolve born from experience in the field. She organizes her notes, checks her gear one last time, and starts the engine. The Dashcam captures her 3-point turn at the junction, the logging road disappearing behind them as she heads back down the mountain. The timestamp reads 4:15 p.m. as Jessica's SUV disappears around a bend in the road, heading back toward civilization. But watching the footage now, one can't help but ask, did something in those woods watch her leave? The Dashcam timestamp reads 7:23 a.m., October 16, 2023, as Jessica's SUV once again approaches the junction with Forest Service Road 3071. Jessica begins her second day of field work with a calm, methodical tone, her voice steady as she narrates to the Dashcam. She notes that she has brought 3 trail cameras, motion sensors, audio recording equipment, and enough supplies for 2 days if needed. As she turns left onto the logging road, the smooth asphalt of the main highway gives way to rough gravel and dirt, and the Dashcam begins to shake with the rhythm of each pothole. Consulting her GPS, Jessica remarks that the road runs about 12 miles into the national forest, and that most of the documented incidents took place between miles 4 and 8, a stretch the locals call Devil's Backbone Ridge. Her tone stays light, but there's a faint pause before she says the name, like she's only now realizing its weight. Driving deeper into the wilderness, the Dashcam captures the gradual transformation of the landscape. The managed forest near the highway gives way to old-growth timber, massive trees that have stood for centuries, their trunks so wide that 3 people holding hands couldn't encircle them. The undergrowth becomes denser, more primitive. At 7:47 a.m., Jessica's radio begins to experience the same interference she encountered the previous day. This time, however, the static is harsher, louder, more rhythmic, and seemingly intentional in its fluctuation. She remarks that the same issue has returned, but that it's noticeably stronger today. She cycles through multiple stations, searching for a clear signal. All she finds are fragments of distant broadcasts buried beneath the static, snatches of music, and clipped words. The low-frequency pulses rise and fall with an irregular cadence. At mile marker 4, Jessica encounters her first major obstacle. A large tree has fallen across the road, its massive trunk blocking any direct passage. The scene forces her to slow and assess. Thanks to decades of old logging work, she spots a narrow bypass road running parallel to the main path and carefully guides her vehicle along it. As she does, she comments on the tree's condition. The brake appears fresh, clean, and without evidence of disease or decay. Something had to bring it down recently. Something strong. The Dashcam records Jessica leaning toward the passenger window to examine the fallen tree. The trunk, nearly 4 feet in diameter, shows no clear reason for its collapse. Its exposed roots appear healthy, strong, and anchored deeply in the soil, suggesting that whatever caused the fall wasn't natural decay or weather. it would require enormous force to tear it from the ground. As she drives farther up the logging road, the terrain shifts. The neatly managed timber gives way to dense, untouched forest, a stretch of wilderness that likely hasn't seen human passage in months. The timestamp on the dashcam reads 8:15 a.m. when Jessica reaches mile 6, the section known as Devil's Backbone Ridge. Consulting her notes, she remarks that this is where most of the recent incidents have been reported. Her plan, she explains methodically, is to establish a small base camp and deploy her trail cameras in a perimeter around the site. Her voice stays steady, but she glances twice at her side mirror, as if something has caught her peripheral vision. Jessica parks in a natural clearing just off the road, surrounded by towering trees that blot out much of the morning light. When she cuts the engine, the quiet feels absolute, broken only by faint wind threading through the canopy and the distant hollow croak of a raven. She checks her phone and confirms that there's no signal, no bars, no data, no contact with the outside world. The realization settles in quietly. From this point on, she is completely alone. At 9:15 a.m., Jessica begins setting up her equipment. The dashcam continues recording as she moves in and out of frame, carrying cameras, tripods, and monitoring devices. She narrates into her handheld recorder as she moves through the site, documenting her setup methodically. Trail Camera 1 is positioned overlooking the main game trail, the most obvious route for large animals moving through the area. Camera 2 covers the narrow creek crossing where she had discovered the footprints the previous day. Camera 3 is placed to monitor the clearing marked by the splintered branches, a spot that still shows signs of recent disturbance. For a brief moment, one camera feed flickers as if reacting to motion, then stabilizes. By 11:30 a.m., Jessica has completed her setup and returns to her vehicle to monitor the feeds from her trail cameras. The dashcam captures her reviewing the live video streams on her laptop, occasionally making notes in a field journal. For nearly 4 hours, nothing happens. The trail cameras record the normal activities of forest wildlife, a few squirrels, a pair of ravens, a black-tailed deer that approaches one of the cameras before being startled away. But every so often, the ambient audio drops for a split second. Then at 3:47 p.m., everything changes. Jessica is reviewing footage from Trail Camera 2 when movement on the main road catches her attention. The dashcam captures her sudden alertness as something large crosses the logging road approximately 200 yards ahead of her position. She instinctively reaches for her binoculars, trying to focus on the shape moving between the trees. The figure is visible for only a few seconds before disappearing into the forest on the opposite side. But those few seconds are enough to confirm Jessica's worst fears and greatest hopes simultaneously. The creature is massive, easily 7.5 feet tall, with a broad, muscular build covered in dark, coarse hair. The treetops sway after it passes, though the air itself is still. She exhales sharply, realizing what she has just seen, a mixture of awe and terror running through her. It's real, everything she came here searching for. That realization seems to override caution. She grabs her handheld camera and exits the vehicle, leaving the engine running and the dashcam recording. This decision, to leave the safety of her SUV and pursue the creature on foot, will prove to be the beginning of the end. The dashcam shows an empty driver's seat, the forest visible through the open door. Jessica's voice drifts from deeper in the woods as she describes following a trail marked by broken branches and crushed vegetation. For several minutes, only her faint commentary and the quiet hum of the forest are audible, until at 3:52 p.m., her tone changes. She reports seeing something standing about 50 yards ahead, silent and motionless, watching her. Her voice lowers, trembling, as she estimates its height at nearly 8 feet, shoulders impossibly wide, arms hanging long past the waist. Then a new sound enters the audio feed, a deep guttural vocalization unlike any known wildlife call. These sounds were later found to be consistent with communication between multiple large primates, possibly coordinating some kind of group activity. If true, how long had they been there? Listening, waiting, learning? At 3:57 p.m., the situation collapses. A roar erupts, powerful enough to distort the Dashcam's audio. Jessica's scream follows, then the chaotic sounds of pursuit, crashing brush, pounding footsteps. Moments later, the camera captures her sprinting from the trees, terrified, pursued by a massive dark shape. She throws herself into the SUV, slams the door, and starts the engine. Through the rear window, the creature is briefly visible, tall, broad, and unmistakably hostile. At 4:01 p.m., Jessica drives at reckless speed down the logging road, the Dashcam shaking violently with each bump. Her voice is tight and breathless as she describes something large keeping pace in the tree line. Something hits the side mirror. It snaps back, but she doesn't stop. Was that a branch or something else? Later commentary by wildlife biologist Dr. James Thornton identified parallels with earlier wilderness disappearances, suggesting an escalation from defensive to predatory behavior. These creatures, he warned, were not merely protecting territory, they were hunting. Then, at 4:04 p.m., the front tire strikes a sharp rock. The blow causes the SUV to swerve violently as air hisses from the puncture. She fights to maintain control, but the deflating tire drags her toward the ditch. By 4:07 p.m., the vehicle is barely drivable. The creature moves closer now, visible in short bursts as it shadows her from the woods. When the tire finally gives out, Jessica stops on a narrow shoulder. Her satellite phone shows no signal. At 4:09 p.m., she decides to abandon the vehicle. She packs essential gear, secures the memory cards, and leaves toward the main road. The Dashcam records her calm but strained voice explaining her plan before she disappears down the logging road. Her last words, directed at the camera, is a farewell to her family. The SUV remains still as the timestamp advances: 4:15 p.m., 4:16 p.m., 4:17 p.m. At 4:18 p.m., movement stirs behind it. The Dashcam keeps recording as the light fades and the forest grows unnaturally quiet. By 4:33 p.m., the silence is broken by distant cries. Jessica's voice calling for help. At 4:35 p.m., the forest falls silent again. The Dashcam continues to record the empty road, its lens fixed on the stillness that follows. This time, the silence doesn't break. However, an audio analysis later revealed that the apparent silence following Jessica's last scream was not truly silent. Using advanced filtering techniques, they isolated sounds below the normal range of human hearing, infrasonic frequencies suggesting large animals moving through the forest. Slow, deliberate movements from multiple sources. At 5:50 p.m., as shadows begin to lengthen across the logging road, something extraordinary happens. The Dashcam captures a figure emerging from the forest, not the massive creature that had been hunting Jessica, but Jessica herself. She appears at the edge of the camera's field of view, moving slowly and unevenly toward her SUV. Something is clearly wrong. Jessica's posture is hunched, her left arm pressed tightly against her torso as if to stem bleeding. Her clothes are torn and smeared with dirt, and dark stains spread across her shirt and jacket. Her right leg drags slightly with each step, suggesting an injury severe enough to impair her movement. When she reaches the vehicle, the Dashcam captures her leaning heavily against the door for support before pulling it open. She breathes in short, shallow bursts, clearly in pain, but remains focused. Despite her condition, her actions are deliberate. She rummages through her gear, removing memory cards from her cameras and checking each one as though verifying what's been recorded. There's no sign of panic in her expression now, only exhaustion and grim determination. Her face is pale, streaked with dirt and blood, and her hands shake from either pain or shock. Still, she continues working, hiding 3 memory cards in specific places around the SUV. One taped under the dashboard, another wedged behind the spare tire, and a third inside the first aid kit. The fourth, containing the most recent footage, she keeps with her handheld camera. At 5:54 p.m., Jessica speaks for the last time. Her voice is weak but steady as she says that someone needs to know what's happening here. Someone has to understand. She closes the SUV door, steadies herself against it for a moment, then turns toward the forest once more. Limping heavily, she disappears into the trees, leaving the dashcam recording the empty clearing behind her. A low, distant thud follows a few seconds later, something heavy hitting the ground. Then silence again. Afterward, Jessica closes the SUV door and turns toward the trees. At 5:57 p.m., the dashcam records her final movements, walking with a strangely rigid gait, heading straight into the darkest part of the forest until she disappears from view. The dashcam continues recording, its battery slowly draining as the hours pass. The timestamp advances through the evening, 6 p.m., 7 p.m., 8 p.m. Darkness falls over the forest, and the camera's night vision mode activates, casting everything in an eerie green glow. Tiny glints, like eyeshine, appear at the edge of the frame, then vanish when the wind stirs. At 11:23 p.m., the dashcam captures its final significant footage. Something large moves through the trees behind the abandoned SUV, a massive bipedal figure that pauses at the edge of the clearing. For nearly 30 seconds, the creature stands motionless, as if studying the abandoned vehicle. Then it turns and disappears back into the forest. Before it's gone, the camera catches a brief reflection, metal, not fur, flashing on its arm. A tool or something taken from her gear? The dashcam continues recording until 3:47 a.m. on October 18th, when its battery finally dies. The screen goes black, ending 73 hours of continuous documentation that would later become crucial evidence in one of the Pacific Northwest's most disturbing missing person cases. October 20th, 2023 dawned clear and cold in the Mount Baker wilderness. Jessica Marcial had been missing for 4 days, and the search effort coordinated by the Whatcom County Sheriff's Office after being alerted by her editor. The search teams had been working systematically through the area where Jessica's cell phone had last pinged a tower, but the rugged terrain and dense forest made progress slow and dangerous. It was volunteer searcher Mike Rodriguez, a local hunting guide familiar with the logging roads, who finally located Jessica's abandoned SUV. Rodriguez immediately contacted the sheriff's office using his satellite radio, and within 2 hours, the abandoned SUV was surrounded by investigators and search teams. The dashcam was still in place, its battery dead, but its memory card intact. Jessica's professional camera equipment was present and undamaged. Her personal belongings, wallet, identification, spare clothes, were all accounted for. They also found 3 memory cards containing additional footage and photographs. The contents of these memory cards would provide the most disturbing evidence yet of what Jessica encountered in the Mount Baker wilderness. The 3 cards recovered from her SUV contained 14 hours of footage and nearly 800 photographs, all of which were immediately secured for analysis. Dr. Patricia Hendricks, a cryptozoologist at the University of Washington, concluded that Jessica had documented multiple unknown primate-like creatures, highly intelligent, social, and coordinated. Footage showed at least 3 individuals, the largest around 8.5 feet tall, communicating through gestures and organized vocal patterns. Their movements suggested deliberate hunting strategy and environmental manipulation far beyond known primate behavior. When the footage was leaked to several online archives in early 2024, reaction was swift and polarized. cryptid researchers hailed it as the most significant evidence of non-human primates in North America. Others, including prominent wildlife biologists and visual effects analysts, accused the leak of being part of a viral campaign, though no production company has ever claimed responsibility. Critics from a film review board noted the rawness of the footage: unsteady framing, ambient noise, no apparent cuts, and questioned how a hoax could sustain such realism without post-production. A forensic imaging report found no signs of digital manipulation, though it stopped short of confirming authenticity. For 6 days, the search teams immediately expanded their efforts, using Jessica's SUV as a base of operations. Search dogs were brought in to try to track her scent, but the results were confusing and contradictory. The handlers exchanged uneasy looks. How could one scent split 3 ways? The dogs picked up Jessica's scent leading away from the vehicle in multiple directions, but the trails didn't make sense. They would start strong, then fade completely, then reappear hundreds of yards away with no connecting path. It was like she had been carried through the air between scent points. The helicopter searches proved equally frustrating. Despite covering over 200 square miles of wilderness, the aerial teams found no trace of Jessica or any signs of her passage through the forest. After 2 weeks of intensive searching, the official search and rescue operation was suspended. However, federal teams still continue covert operations, searching for the concealed settlement seen in Jessica's footage. No official statement has been made, but at night, hikers along the mountain's edge still report the same low-frequency hum captured on her final recording. Thanks for watching. If you like stories like these, click here for more.